over northern England and maybe Wales. 1 or 2 showers in the far northwest where it'll be quite breezy, a cool, comfortable night across the north, but another very warm one further south, particularly so across the southeast. How does the weekend shape up? Well, it's a bit of a mixed picture because we'll hold on to the very warm conditions across the southeast, but for much of the Midlands, Wales, cloudy in this zone with the likelihood of some rain, which could be on the heavy side as well, perhaps also affecting southwest England during the afternoon. Further north, well, it's on the cool side, certainly compared to of late, but actually quite a pleasant day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Bright and breezy with some sunny spells. The rain could turn quite heavy as we go through the day. Some brighter colours there over parts of the Midlands, Wales and northern England. The southeast and East Anglia staying dry until the evening when there is the risk of some heavy thundery showers, but they'll be somewhat hit and miss. By Sunday, there's still a chance of some showers, but mostly across the south, turning drier through next week, but also quite a bit cooler.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, we've got a fast-paced, veritable political news bonanza coming up for you this hour on The Briefing. Yesterday, the Bank of England raised interest rates to 1.25%. What does this mean for mortgage payers and the wider economy? We'll speak to the economist Andrew Lillico. And how can the UK become more energy efficient without relying on foreign exports or indeed imports? We will speak to energy expert Angela Knight on what the government needs to do next. And we'll get reaction from Europe as Ukraine is set to become a formal candidate to join the EU. And of course, as always, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing me gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. London Gatwick is cutting the number of daily flights this summer to help tackle issues with staffing. The airport will limit its number to 825 flights a day in July and 850 in August, down from 900 in previous years. Gatwick said the decision was taken to help passengers experience a more reliable and better standard of service. Well, joining us live from Gatwick Airport is our national reporter Paul Hawkins. Paul, Gatwick have said the vast majority of scheduled flights will run as normal. Should we believe them?
Yeah, we should, because I've just spoken to them myself. 95% of the flights over July and August will run as scheduled. What the airline are doing, what the airport, I should say, are doing is getting ahead of the curve. So we saw that there were some last-minute cancellations during the Jubilee. There were some queues. What they're doing now is being proactive. And effectively, they have told the airlines that fly from here, you have to reduce the number of flights that you're putting on at busy times in July and August to match the ground handling staff that you employ. They've got troubles employing the levels of staff on the ground, so reduce your number of flights. 5% of flights will be affected. Many of those customers will be offered alternative times to fly. So instead of 10 o'clock on a Friday night, you might fly at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Alternatively, you will also be offered to fly on another airline on the same route. A very, 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 very tiny minority of that 5% may miss out and have to rebook completely for another time, but there will be lots of notice given for that, and so people won't turn up to the airport disappointed. So certainly not chaos. It's about Gatwick Airport kind of managing expectations by taking control of the situation from the airlines that fly from here.
Now, Paul, Gatwick Airport says staff shortages played no role in the death of a disabled passenger who reportedly fell after getting off a plane without a helper. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, the airport's sticking to that line of saying that staff shortages did not play a role in the death of that passenger. They're saying that the passenger also didn't have to wait very long at all, and that there is an investigation underway from the authorities, and that pending the outcome of that investigation, they're not commenting any further.
Paul, thank you. Paul Hawkins, our national reporter outside Gatwick Airport. Now, it's not just travel disruption at the airports we have to look out for. We can also expect travel chaos on the train lines too. Hundreds of railway workers at South Eastern will vote on whether to strike as disputes over pay and jobs continue. The ballot opens next week and closes on the 11th of July, which could see strikes start from July the 25th. That as half of the rail lines close on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday of next week because of an RMT union strike. The union's also staging a 24-hour walkout with Unite on the London Underground on Tuesday. The President of the EU Commission has proposed Ukraine becomes a formal candidate for EU membership. In her statement, Ursula von der Leyen, wearing the colours of the Ukrainian flag, said it was on the understanding the country carry out a number of reforms. Ukraine says it's grateful for the proposal.
Yes, Ukraine deserves European perspective. Yes, Ukraine should be welcomed as a candidate country. This is on the understanding that good work has been done, but important work also remains to be done. The entire process is merits-based. So it goes by the book, and therefore progress depends entirely on Ukraine. It is Ukraine that has it in their hands, and what could be better to shape your own future.
And staying with Ukraine, the European broadcasting unions decided the 2023 Eurovision Song Contest, which Ukraine won this year, won't be held in the war-torn country. Instead, the BBC is in talks to host it in the UK, this year's runner-up. Home Secretary Priti Patel has signed an order to extradite Julian Assange to the US, where he'll face charges of espionage. The WikiLeaks founder has 14 days to appeal the decision. Mr. Assange is wanted by the American authorities over documents leaked in 2010 and 2011. The Home Office said the UK courts have found extradition is compatible with his human rights, including his right to a fair trial. WikiLeaks has called it a dark day for press freedom and British democracy. And parts of the UK today could reach up to 34 degrees as the Met Office issues a level 3 heat health alert for London, the east of England and the southeast. Level 3 alerts are issued to help healthcare services prepare for possible increases in demand due to the heat. Well, stay safe. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Tom with the briefing.
Welcome to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, here on GB News. We're with you for the next hour. Well, let's kick off the show today by discussing the state of the British economy. Because yesterday, the Bank of England raised interest rates for the 5th time in a row, up to 1.25%, the highest since the financial crisis, but still historically low. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee announced that the decision was a bid to temper rising inflation without choking off economic growth. Well, joining me now to talk through how well they did and what effect it may have is Dr. Andrew Lillico, the Executive Director and Principal of Europe Economics. So welcome to the programme, Andrew. I suppose 1.25%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it did rise by 25% in effect. What's the effect of this?
Well, the effect will be to slightly increase mortgage rates for those eventually as it flows through. I mean, the vast majority of people have fixed rate mortgages just at the moment. In fact, the considerable majority, almost the entirety of mortgages that have been new over the past few years have been on fixed rates. So it won't affect them immediately. But over time, as people refinance their mortgages, those have become more expensive. It'll make borrowing a little bit more expensive. It might affect the monetary growth in the economy. So all of these things will tend to bear down a little bit on inflation. However, inflation is scheduled to go to 11%. That's the Bank of England's latest estimate. So the difference between what the interest rate is, 1.25%, and what inflation is scheduled to be as 11% is at a many decades high. That gap is enormously negative and has never been as negative as that since the early 1970s.
Should the bank have raised rates higher still then?
Absolutely. It should have raised rates some time ago, and it should have raised rates more on this occasion. The Federal Reserve in America raised rates by 0.75%, not 0.25%. 3 members of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee voted to raise rates by 0.5%. I would have thought that that was the absolute minimum. I would have thought you'd have probably wanted to raise by more than that. But the Bank of England is well behind the curve here. Now, part of the reason for that is that over the past couple of decades, chancellors have consistently encouraged the Bank of England to see through what they regarded as temporary spikes in inflation instead of keeping inflation under control in individual years. Now, this is all very well if inflation is going to be, 3.2% instead of 3% in a particular year. But if inflation is going to 11%, it's not very cheerful for the rest of us to say, oh, well, sometime in a couple of years, inflation will eventually come back down to 2% by itself. Well, yes, but in the meantime, we have to bear all the consequences for our cost of living of very rapid rises in prices.
Well, the Bank of England clearly are thinking about other things as well. Economic growth is projected to be sclerotic as well as inflation high, and potentially raising interest rates by a greater degree might choke what little growth we have away.
Oh, well, absolutely. It might have that kind of effect. I mean, we've had fairly strong growth over the past year or so because we were recovering out of the massive reduction in output that was associated with the lockdowns and so on with COVID. So we've had fairly rapid growth, and we therefore wouldn't expect to have quite so rapid growth in the future anyway. It might be that if we had slightly higher interest rates, then that would mean slightly slower growth. On the other hand, having high inflation also means slower growth because it means that household budgets suffer a lot. So I don't think it's really a matter of the economy slowing or not slowing. The economy is going to slow under these circumstances one way or another. The question is, who bears the pain? And is it a matter of those who've borrowed bearing the pain as interest rates going up, or those who've lent or who are savers or on fixed incomes bearing the pain as their real incomes get reduced? Now, the government, of course, is the largest debt holder in the economy by a very long way, and its debts have been going up very considerably. And so it's greatly in the government's interests that we adopt the inflationary route rather than the slightly higher interest rate route. And that's one of the problems with allowing your governments to have very high deficits each year. Under these sorts of circumstances, their incentives are all awry.
I suppose, yes, they want to inflate that debt away. I wonder, though, why the Bank of England is considering, as it clearly is, GDP growth. It has one mandate, and its mandate is to get inflation or keep inflation as close to 2% as possible. In your opinion, have the Bank of England gone beyond their mandate?
Well, I don't think that they have any practical restriction on what they do anymore. They used to have a rule which suggested that they were allowed to manage the economy so as to maximise GDP growth, provided that they kept inflation within a range that was specified by the Chancellor. It used to be 1% to 3%. Then what happened some years ago was that they went outside that range, and then they started saying, well, that doesn't matter. All it means is that we have to write a letter. And Chancellors agreed. So the reality is that governments, Chancellor after Chancellor, have decided that it's fine if the Bank of England allows inflation to go well beyond target, provided it's going to come back to target somewhere off in the future, this year, next year, sometime never. And really all that they care about is the management of GDP growth. And I think that that's a very poor situation. It's very short-termist and it actually harms GDP growth over the longer term. You want to have a situation in which interest rates get back to a normal kind of level relative to inflation. We should have interest rates which are a couple of percentage points, perhaps 3% above the rate of inflation. At the moment, we have interest rates which are nearly 10% below the expected rate of inflation. And that's a very dangerous and damaging situation to have.
It's a really fascinating discussion there. I wonder if we're going to see some more rate rises sort of inching up over time, getting close to anything near what you're suggesting. I suppose we're going to get some inching up, but maybe not in a dramatic way. Andrew Lillico, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this afternoon. It's been a really interesting discussion there, really clear explanation. Well, now to a story that has been little reported in the Western world. We'll be discussing Ukraine as it reaches... Oh, sorry, I do apologise. We'll be discussing energy costs and some issues over with the United States liquid natural gas. We'll also be discussing Ukraine as it reaches candidate status to enter the European Union. But before all that, here's a short break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, last week we saw an explosion at one of the largest liquefied natural gas plants in the United States. It produces 20% of US liquefied natural gas production. The plant is not expected to return to full operation now until the end of 2022. And earlier this week, it was also announced that Gazprom would be restricting their supply of gas to Europe. That's the Russian gas supplier. So a real restriction in natural gas flows around the world. What consequence will this have for the United Kingdom? Joining me now to discuss what this means for us is the former CEO of Energy UK and former Conservative Minister, Angela Knight. Welcome to the programme, Angela. It amazes me that this explosion, this really significant event in the United States, has received barely any coverage at all in the United Kingdom. We import quite a lot of natural gas from the United States. Might this affect us?
Possibly not. And actually, we're not alone in this particular incident, not getting much in the way of press or media coverage. It's exactly the same in America, because I've just flown in on the overnight from the US, and the only commentary I could find over there was, what does this do to Joe Biden, you know, the president of the United States, promises to help Europe out of its gas problems. Now, excuse me. If we come to what the point that you've actually made, that this is one of the largest LNG plants. It's the biggest, I think, exporting liquid natural gas plant in the United States, and it's exporting about 20%. So that means there's a lot of gas that's not going to be able to be put into tankers and shipped to elsewhere in the world, predominantly Europe, probably until the end of this year. Because although they thought it was only going to be shut for 3 weeks, it now looks like it's 3 months or probably more. Right now, it's not going to mean much. I mean, there'll have been a blip in the wholesale gas price because it's such a volatile thing anyway. But at the moment, with it being summer, consumption being down, it's not going to cause much in the way of a ripple. But one thing that this will do, and certainly seems to be having a real impetus, putting a real impetus, it's behind looking for a broad base of suppliers into Europe. Because at the same time as this gas plant's caused a problem, so of course, you know, Moscow is turning down again the gas supplies to Europe, because whilst of course we say, well, the EU, the UK, we shouldn't take from Russia, we still are. There's a pipeline called Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 2 hasn't been open, but Nord Stream 1, which is pumping this stuff in, well, that's been constrained as well. It's called maintenance, but who's to know? It's probably as much political as maintenance. So the EU has turned to Israel. Qatar is building more LNG plants. There's some Africa suppliers as well. Don't forget Iran in all this. So, you know, the fact that the whole of the EU is turning away from Russia is actually giving an impetus to other suppliers. Now, what this mixture is going to look like when we come to winter is actually quite difficult at this moment to say. But I do think that the point that you're making is absolutely right. We shouldn't just pay attention to energy supplies when it's cold and we turn on the central heating. The whole issue is all about getting us security for the winter. And a lot of that work has to be done in the summer when consumption is not that high.
But of course, we're very vulnerable to world events in the United Kingdom because we don't have that much storage capacity for gas in the UK. We have a lot less storage than a lot of European countries do. Might that make us slightly more vulnerable?
We have a lot less storage because we've got a lot more of our own gas coming out of the North Sea. So I do agree with you. We should have more storage. And I know that this big storage under the sea called Rough is being worked on right now and should at least be partially operational this winter. Rough can take about 12 days of gas storage for this country, which might in one respect not sound a lot, but in another respect that shaves all the tops of the high prices when the wholesale market goes up. But we've also taking more contracts with Norway as well, which is the other big North Sea gas supplier. So in fact, we're moving, inching round where we take our gas from. We used to get 40% out of the North Sea. We've now got 50% out of the North Sea. Shell struck some more contracts with Norway. So we are nothing like as dependent on LNG as the rest of Europe. That doesn't mean that I'm sitting here relaxed about it. I'm not. But our dependency is less. And of course, our North Sea, the part of the North Sea that comes into us, that is quite a big storage as well. And what high prices have meant is that more is being pulled out in the pro-tem from the North Sea. So that will help us as well.
So looking forward now to this winter, we're not potentially expecting to be in the worst position in the world. There are certainly some silver linings there, but it's going to be a pretty tough winter for a lot of people. Prices aren't expected to come down anytime soon.
No, I think it's going to be a tough winter as well. We can't expect the world prices of energy to be steady. With a bit of luck, they will. They will all have more or less plateaued out this autumn, but we can't be sure. And there's two things around here. One is, as you rightly point out, it's committed gas supplies to make both the UK and also Europe as good as possible. We are an island, but we can't look at this from just an island perspective. But secondly, more work needs to be done on electricity costs as well, because electricity is produced in this country by nuclear, by wind and by gas. And the arrangement which averages out the price is an arrangement which needs to change. And that's what the Chancellor actually has announced that he's looking at. It's a very complicated algorithm, but if they can get to that, then that will help not just us in our homes, but importantly, it will help industry, who gets none of this extra assistance that those in the poorer ends of society are getting.
Yes, that's an interesting point, actually. We don't talk enough about how businesses are struggling here as well as households. But Angela Knight, thank you so much for talking us through those issues. Really fascinating conversation there. Value your time this afternoon. Well, on from artificial heating to how hot the actual country is. The UK is set for a scorcher today as temperatures soar to highs of 34 degrees Celsius, as health bosses have issued an urgent warning to Brits across the country. Well, joining me now from a Hampstead Heath that is absolutely scorchio in North London is GB News reporter Alice Porter. Alice, I love the hat. How's it feeling out there?
Well, I have to say, Tom, I've had worse days at work. I have to say, there are so many people out enjoying the park. There are people behind me who are, for those of you who are watching, you can see them splashing around in the water and all having a much deserved dip, because temperatures are expected to get even hotter than where I'm at the moment. At about 2 p.m, we're expecting it to peak at 34 degrees Celsius, which would make the UK hotter than parts of the Caribbean, parts of LA, parts of Israel. I mean, it really is extraordinary. We are expecting the Met Office to declare an official heat wave, and that means is when there's 3 consecutive days when temperatures are exceed the expectations. For those of you who are watching or listening to this and thinking, this is absolutely dreadful, I can't stand the heat, I can't stand the high pollen levels, rest assured that by the weekend things are starting to cool down, so it will be a lot easier to manage. But at the moment there is a level 3 heat health warning which has been issued. So for those of you, particularly people who are vulnerable, people who are elderly, they need to be extra careful, stay inside, drink lots of cold water, have lots of sun cream on and look after yourself.
We are expecting a bit of regional variation today, though. Oh, goodness me! Do you know what? Shall we let you go grab your hat, Alice? Because I would hate for you to lose it. Oh my goodness! Has it fallen? Has it fallen in the actual water? Where's the hat gone?
No, it seems. It's balanced on some reeds. I'm going to have to
oh, fantastic.
Try and get it out.
Well, do you know what, Alice?
I'll update you, Tom. I'll let you know.
Excellent. We'll try to come back to you later in the programme, but you go on your hat rescue mission. Very, very important work to be done there. Alice Porter, thank you. Oh, goodness me, live television. I absolutely love it. Now, the leaders of Germany, France and Italy and Romania on Thursday threw their weight behind accepting Ukraine and Moldova as EU membership candidates. The EU will likely request strict requirements on democratic and institutional reforms, such as the fight against corruption, as part of the EU enlargement process. Ukraine will also probably have to reach a peace agreement with Russia before any talks with the EU could formally begin. But joining me now from Berlin is freelance Germany correspondent Thomas Sparrow. Thomas, welcome to the programme. I'm glad to see that you're indoors and no hats are flying anywhere. But first of all, were we surprised that the European Commission has today said that candidate status could be conferred upon Ukraine?
No, we were not surprised about that. That was something that was expected, and in particular, it was something that was expected, Tom, after those 4 EU leaders travelled to Ukraine yesterday to show precisely their support to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. So it was something that was expected. If you want to understand what that means, I would understand that as a rather symbolic move, as a move that does not carry a lot of political risks as far as European leaders are concerned, because one thing is declaring Ukraine as an official EU candidate, something that all 27 EU members would have to decide. They'll probably decide that next week. Another very different thing is the actual process that could lead Ukraine to become an EU member. That is a difficult process, that is a long process, and it's also a process where EU countries do not necessarily see eye to eye. There are countries like Austria, for example, that are rather concerned that Ukraine could get a fast-track process, whereas other countries that are aspiring to join the group, like countries in the Balkans, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia or Montenegro, have been waiting in the queue for some time. So what you can expect is most countries to actually grant Ukraine that EU candidate status, but another very different thing, another very difficult thing would actually be the process to become an EU member. That could take a very long time.
It's interesting looking at those list of EU official candidates. Many of them, people would suggest, are not particularly close to becoming EU members. One country that's sort of on the path, supposedly, to membership is Turkey, of course, which has been moving in, it seems, the other direction for the last couple of years.
Well, actually, Turkey was granted that EU candidate status in 1999, so that gives you an idea of how long the process could actually take. So that's why the decision by the EU Commission to suggest Ukraine as an EU candidate formally, and that support that was granted by the 4 EU leaders in Kiev yesterday has to be seen first and foremost as a sign of support towards Ukraine, but more importantly as a symbolic sign of support towards Ukraine. It doesn't necessarily change things on the ground, it doesn't necessarily change things politically for Ukraine in the immediate term, but it obviously does show that the EU, in particular those very powerful countries within the EU, are clearly supporting Ukraine politically, economically, and also militarily. Although here I would like to also point a caveat, because in the case of Germany, for example, Germany has promised a lot of weapons for Ukraine, but it has so far delivered comparatively few weapons. And that's something that Ukrainian officials, from the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany to the own government in Kiev, have strongly criticized time and time and again when it comes to Germany.
Yes, it's interesting looking at the reception of certain EU leaders in Kiev, in Ukraine in general. Chancellor Scholz didn't have the warmest of receptions this week.
And it has to do with some context here, because in April, you may remember that the German president, so the German head of state, not the chancellor, that's he's called, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, wanted to travel to Ukraine with other EU leaders, and he was not welcome. And that actually led to a diplomatic spat between Berlin and Kiev. At the same time, Chancellor Scholz said back then that he would not travel to Kiev and that he would only do so if there was something concrete to discuss. So basically not just for a photo op, if you will, but obviously things are changing now. There's an understanding within EU leaders that it's important to show their support in Kiev. And from a German perspective, it's also particularly important because you may know that in the next few days, in fact, at the end of June, Germany will host the G7 meeting in the southern part of the country, in Bavaria. So it will be important for Chancellor Scholz to actually show that he went to Ukraine, that he went to Kiev, and that he was able to show his support to Ukraine politically with his EU candidate support, but also economically and militarily.
It's interesting looking at how various EU countries have been responding. It's generally considered that Germany has been a slower mover on issues like sanctions and issues like support. Is that something to do with the political culture in Germany, or is that something to do with public pressure? Why is Germany moving more slowly than, say, the United Kingdom or the United States?
Well, one reason, and that's a very clear reason if you look at different polls here in the country, is that a majority of people here in the country actually support the way the German government has been handling this issue. In other words, doing so with more caution than, let's say, other countries. There was a recent poll that revealed precisely that, and that's why, to a large extent, Chancellor Scholz has been responding to public interest here in the country. But it also has to do with a lot of support that's coming from abroad, a lot of pressure that's coming from abroad, in particular for Germany to react. So it's a mixture of both elements. It's a mixture of that caution that is very typical here in Germany when it comes, for example, to military affairs, but it also has to do with Germany's interests abroad, in particular Germany's interests within the European Union. So that explains why Germany's support to Ukraine has been comparatively slower than the support that we've seen from other countries around the world.
Well, it's a really, really interesting situation, and we'll be keeping a key eye, of course, on that G7 meeting. But for now, Thomas Sparrow, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this afternoon. Really interesting discussion there. Good points to know. Now, coming up next, we'll be discussing tax cuts, as Levelling Up Minister Michael Gove has appeared to rule them out for the foreseeable future. But first, it's your latest GB News headlines.
It's 12:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. London Gatwick is cutting the number of daily flights this summer to help tackle issues with staffing. The airport will limit its number to 825 flights a day in July and 850 in August, down from 900 in previous years. Hundreds of railway workers at South Eastern will vote on whether to strike as disputes over pay and jobs continue. The ballot opens next week and closes on the 11th of July, which could see strikes start from July the 25th, increasing threats of a summer of chaos. It's as half of rail lines close on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday of next week because of an RMT union strike. The European broadcasting unions decided the 2023 Eurovision Song Contest, which Ukraine won this year, can't be held in the war-torn country. Instead, the BBC is in talks to host it in the UK, this year's runners-up. Home Secretary Priti Patel has signed an order to extradite Julian Assange to the US, where he'll face charges of espionage. The WikiLeaks founder has 14 days to appeal the decision. Mr. Assange is wanted by the American authorities over documents leaked in 2010 and 2011. TV Online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Tom in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, tax cuts are not likely to be introduced for another 2 years. That's according to Michael Gove. After the Bank of England raised interest rates and warned inflation will hit 11% by this autumn, well, the Levelling Up Secretary suggested that bringing forward the planned tax cuts to income tax could be dangerous because it could stoke inflation and add to the government deficit. Well, joining me now to talk through all of this is Darren Friend. He's policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for coming into the studio on what is such a lovely day. I suppose, first of all, Michael Gove has a bit of a point. Sometimes tax cuts can in themselves be inflationary.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show, Tom. And, I mean, they can be, but when we think about it, government is spending more money at this time as well. Rishi Sunak announced a wide-ranging amount of measures a few weeks ago, which is going to increase spending. And, of course, more money supply means that inflation is going to go up as well. And so I think rather than always asking for taxpayers to cut back, I think that now is the time for Boris to be bold. After all, politicians such as Michael Gove need to remember that cutting taxes delivers more economic activity, it boosts productivity, and delivers more money in people's pocket, which is what we need in this country right now. And so I think what the government should be doing is really help growth go gangbusters. Boris can make a start on that by doing, as we would suggest, bringing forward the proposed income tax cut. And that should help taxpayers in the short term and the long term.
And I suppose there's an argument that some of the proposed tax rises might counterintuitively be inflationary in and of themselves. Looking at that corporation tax rise due to come in next year from 19% all the way up to 25%, quite an enormous rise. Surely businesses, in order to fund that, will have to put up their prices.
Exactly. What we need to remember is that businesses don't ultimately pay tax. Taxpayers do. And at the minute, we're facing a 70-year high tax burden. You mentioned the corporation tax increase. We've had the national insurance increase. Income tax thresholds are being frozen. Taxpayers simply cannot afford right now to be paying even more in tax. And ultimately, it's only the government that can take action on this. And so what they should be doing is they could cut VAT down to 17.5%, bring forward the income tax cut and double it, in my opinion. And also, if they increase the national insurance threshold, as they said they're going to do in July, that could deliver £56 billion more in GDP and increase average incomes by £13 per week over a decade. And so I think that is the way to get the UK through this current crisis that we're facing.
Now, no one can deny that tax cuts can definitely spur growth, can generate new wealth in the medium to long term. But in the short term, it does create budgetary issues. And in an era where interest rates are rising, the cost of borrowing is going up, what do you say to those who say that tax cuts in the short term would create a big deficit issue for the Treasury?
Well, what I would say, Tom, is that let's take the corporation tax for an example. When corporation tax was cut in the 2010s period, that saw revenues go up. And so quite often what people say is, well, if you cut taxes, that's going to take revenue away from the Treasury. That's not really true. I think we need to take a longer-term approach to tax cuts, because when you cut people's taxes, it means they've got more incentive then and more money to spend in this economy, which is then circulated back to the Treasury through VAT and other forms of taxation. So rather than always making the simple argument, in my opinion, that we need to increase taxes to increase revenue, let's cut taxes, deliver more for people in their pockets, and ultimately see more revenue to the Treasury in the long term.
It was just last week that the Prime Minister stood up in Blackpool and said that he wanted to bring down taxes, that you can't tax your way into prosperity, that you can't spend your way out of an inflation crisis. It seems like it's a lot longer than a week ago now, judging by what the government's saying now. Do the government's words match its actions?
Well, I don't think they do at the very moment. I mean, we've been talking about a range of options that they could have. I mean, what we were also talking about last week was the price of fuel. That reached over £100 to fill up your tank. Now, the government could take action right now on that. And so rather than warm words about essentially the cost of living crisis, getting it all through together, the government should be taking action right now. And for example, with fuel duty, they could cut that, reduce the amount of fuel that is taxed. And so I think the government needs to actually start acting on what it says, rather than waiting and pushing, essentially waiting for another 2 years before taking any further action.
Well, we'll be following closely whether they take on that advice. Let's hope they've been listening. But for now, Darwin, friend, thanks so much for coming in and talking us through that really, really important issue. Cheers. Well, now moving on, today marks one of the most popular days for travellers to get away. Let's cross over to Gatwick and get the latest from GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins. Paul, thanks for joining us. I suppose there's been some pretty dire news recently about all sorts of flights being cancelled. What's the latest?
Right, let's just give you the truth, Tom, which is that there's no talk of chaos here. This is about the airport telling the airlines to reduce the number of flights to match the level of ground staff that they have, the numbers of ground staff they had. The airport, Gatwick, did some research and it found out that the numbers of ground staff weren't enough to meet the flights that the airlines were scheduling. So they've asked the airlines to reduce the number of flights. And when we talk about how many flights are going to be reduced, there's been a lot of talk about that in the media, talking about chaos and thousands of flights cancelled. We're talking about 5% of the flights from Gatwick over July and August. 5%. Now, if you're planning on flying from Gatwick in the next couple of months, wait and see if an email drops into your inbox that says that your flight has been cancelled. You should be offered an alternative flight time with the same airline. So instead of flying at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, you fly at, say, 7 o'clock on the Saturday morning. Alternatively, you could be offered another flight from another airline, but on the same route. They think that almost certainly in almost all the cases will happen, and a very small, tiny minority of that 5% may have to look at travelling at alternative times. But very, very few people are going to miss out on flying over July and August. It's about managing expectations, because the airport does admit that over the Jubilee weekend, people did turn up. There were 1 or 2 flight cancellations. There were problems with queues, airport security. The airport says, look, we've recruited 400 staff now. We're aiming to get to 450. We're almost there. So in terms of airport security, we're sorted with that. We're reducing the number of flights until the airlines can recruit more ground handling staff, and then we can meet demand, hopefully, by the end of August. But the whole point of this is that we're 6 weeks away from July and August, so it's about the airport and the airlines giving plenty of notice so people don't turn up here, as we do, really excited about a holiday, only to find out the flight's been cancelled.
Well, Paul Hawkins, this sounds absolutely sensible. This sounds like an ordinary, normal thing that an airport should be doing, not cancelling the flights on the day, but trying to get some order there weeks and indeed months beforehand so people can plan. Why on earth didn't they do this, as we saw all of that chaos over Easter, as we saw all of that chaos over the last few months?
Well, Tom Harwood, the industry would say that it's about recovering from the pandemic. If you look at the big picture, the whole travel industry, and especially the airlines and the airports, the demand has increased faster than they anticipated, and so they're trying to match supply to demand at the moment, and that's going to take time for the two to match up. So at the moment, there's a lot of demand. They've had problems with recruiting more staff who were laid off over the pandemic, temporary staff who now have to get security clearance, etc. And so they're now catching up, and eventually they say by the end of August they will meet demand, and that they've learned the lessons from what happened over the Jubilee weekend, and that it's about giving plenty of notice so that people don't turn up to the airport and become disappointed.
Well, let's hope that it all works out, and indeed that people can get on those alternative flights. I know we'll be keeping a keen eye on this story. It affects most people up and down the country. But for now, Paul Hawkins, thank you so much for joining us today on The Briefing this afternoon. Well, let's turn our attention back to Westminster now. This week, Keir Starmer was branded boring by a member of the shadow cabinet. This got the politics team at GB News interested in the state of the mainstream party leaders' approval ratings among the public. Well, let's explore exactly where they are and what the public think of our party leaders. Joining me now to discuss this is GB News polling analyst David Cowling. Welcome to the programme, David. It's a really interesting time, of course. We've got these two by-elections coming up in less than a week now. Will how party leaders are seen be influencing how people vote, or is it more local factors?
Well, that's been a very big debate for a very long time. For my own part, I think it's more to do with, in most times, this national status of the party. So the by-election may be occurring in Cornwall, it may be occurring in Yorkshire, wherever, but in most cases, I think one could reasonably say that it's national issues that have been the bigger consideration for most people. And in terms of the party leaders, well, we are, it seems to be, in an extraordinary time. We've got Boris Johnson, who was, Mr. Popularity, is now sort of a beached whale with very little sign of the tide coming in to lift him. We've got Ed Davey, to whom the general thing, who, in terms of most people, who. And with Keir Starmer, he's now entering the third year of his leadership of the Labour Party. There used to be an old cliche that when a new leader came along, if it takes about 6 months for the public to make their mind up about them, and very, very difficult to shift it after that. For him, it's been extraordinary. I mean, still now, a very, very significant number of people just answer, don't know. And so that's the sort of, if you like, the panorama, if you like, of leadership that we've got at the moment at a time of considerable crisis, considerable challenges. We are in a rather strange period historically.
Sort of a time for potentially giants, but we're getting pretty small men. I wonder, there's a lot of discussion online, particularly amongst the Labour left, calling Keir Starmer someone who's fundamentally dishonest, someone who stood to become leader of the Labour Party on one set of policies, and as soon as he got into position, ditching all of those policies and swapping completely. I'm sorry, we're going to have to pause this conversation just for a second because Julian Assange is giving a press conference which we can listen into right now.
Okay.
I think he's about to start speaking. He's let's listen live, to Julian Assange's wife, Stella Morris, after the Home Secretary gave the green light, of course, for his extradition to the United States. Stella Morris expected to start speaking any moment now from a location live in central London. We'll bring you those words as soon as they start. We're expecting them in the next couple of moments. Of course, Julian Assange has been fighting this extradition battle for the last decade, really. He was hauled up in the Ecuadorian embassy until a change of government in that country changed that country's policy. And indeed, Julian Assange left that embassy over a year ago now, 2 years ago, I believe. Julian Assange's wife there, Stella Morris, about to give a press conference on her thoughts on the Home Secretary Priti Patel's decision to give a green light to this extradition order to the United States of America. Of course, Julian Assange has been a name that has been... here we go. The press conference is beginning now.
Such short notice. The FDA is delighted to be here on this really important day in the Julian Assange extradition journey. And we're here with Stella Assange, Jennifer Robinson and Tim Dawson of the NUJ. So as usual, we're going to start with a few opening remarks by all of the speakers, and then we'll start with questions from the floor. So it's over to you, Stella.
Hi, everyone. Sorry? Can't see me.
You're fine.
You're fine, they're speaking to the camera.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you for coming on short notice. I'm sure you all understand the extremely serious implications this has for all of you and the profession and for human rights and for Julian personally. I spoke to Julian about 45 minutes ago. He had just learned of the decision. He was not contactable in Belmarsh, so no one had been able to deliver the decision to him until he had spoken to one of his lawyers just before speaking to me. This was always a possibility that Priti Patel would approve sending Julian to the country that has plotted to assassinate him, to the country that Julian exposed the crimes of. And we're not at the end of the road here. We're going to fight this. We're going to use every appeal avenue. And we're going to fight. I'm going to spend every waking hour fighting for Julian until he's free, until justice is served.
Jen, do you want to open your remarks?
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay? My name's Jennifer Robinson. I'm a legal counsel for Julian Assange and for WikiLeaks and have been representing Julian for over a decade. This is the outcome that we have been concerned about for the last decade. This decision is a grave threat to freedom of speech, not just for Julian, but for every journalist and editor and media worker in this country. He faces 175 years in prison for publishing information for which he's won journalism awards the world over and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. This should shock and concern everyone, every citizen, every journalist, every editor, every media organisation. We will continue to appeal. This is not the end of the road, and we will use every appeal mechanism available to us to prevent this extradition. We continue to call upon the Biden administration to drop this case because of the grave threat it poses to free speech everywhere and across the United States. And we continue to call on the Australian government to take action and to protect this Australian citizen who is at risk.
Hello, my name is Tim Dawson. I represent the National Union of Journalists and the International Federation of Journalists. The reason I'm here is because of the dire threats that this poses to all journalists. And it's worth thinking through what that threat is from the position of an individual journalist. If somebody hands you a classified document...
Well, there we go there. That's just some moments from the start of that press conference, of course, mainly with Julian Assange's wife, Stella Morris, but also people who have been supporting him in his fight against extradition to the United States as well. Let's return back to polling now for Westminster with, of course, David Cowling, who is still here with me. Now, we were rudely interrupted by that press conference, but we were talking about how there's a view among the left of the Labour Party that Keir Starmer is a dishonest individual, a dishonest politician who said one thing to get elected and did a different thing elsewhere. Is that something that's fed through to the public at all?
Well, first of all, could I say, being as old and ugly as I am, the idea that a politician might say something to be elected and then change his mind or change tack or her mind later doesn't come quite as much of a shock to me as it might do to some on the left and maybe even some of your viewers. Starmer knows that after the catastrophic sort of shambles of the 2019 defeat, with Jeremy Corbyn's experiment, where the left had their best chance and their best shot and ended up with fewer Labour MPs than 1935, that something has to change. And much of his 2 years so far, into his third year of his leadership, has been trying to drag the party out of that pit. And of course, he has two horses to ride at once. One is the Labour Party, but the other is the general public. And the general public are looking for two things, many other things maybe, but two principal things. Is the person that they're being asked to vote for, the leader of the party, does he strike you or she strike you as somebody who could really do the job, really be a prime minister, really represent us on the national stage? And secondly, do they have a set of policies which actually are attractive, realistic, and make me feel they're worth support? Now, none of that is strange, but it does appear to be strange to some people on the Labour left that they don't quite get that.
It's interesting. President Obama of the United States invented the term Romnesia to describe Mitt Romney, his 2012 opponent's about turn, saying one thing to the Republican selectorate to get the nomination and then tacking to the centre to try and win in the General election. I suppose a similar thing here has happened with the Labour Party.
And, you know, it's since time immemorial, in a way. The Labour Party has been this combination, started off by the trade unions, but it was for many, many decades a combination of, if you like, socially conservative Labour voters and sort of Fabian liberals. And they've managed, that's how the Labour Party came through. And for many years they coexisted. And part of Labour's dilemma at the moment is that that has fractured and that the social conservatives, I think, in the Labour Party don't feel comfortable anymore, don't feel welcome anymore. And what Starmer has to do is not to sit there and suddenly create something out of something new. Somebody's given him a new train set and he can assemble it. He's got to deal with the consequences of the last 20 years of the Labour Party and its failures to be elected, and to ask the question why, and then do something about it that's actually going to do something, rather than just speak to the air and charm his left, but to no purpose in terms of elections.
Tricky job, and no doubt a fascinating one to continue to watch. But for now, David Cowling, thank you so much for talking us through those issues there. Now, just before you go, if you were watching earlier, we saw our reporter Alice Porter lose her hat in the wind on a sunny Hampstead Heath. Well, we've got a breaking news update for you. Alice has sent in this video. She's been helped by a friendly paddleboarder, and we're pleased to report that the hat has duly been saved. Well, what a good news story to end today's programme on. Brilliant news there for Alice. She will be updating us throughout the day on the heat situation there. Next up, it's On the Money, but first, here's some more weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Today is all about the heat in the south, but it's not hot and sunny everywhere. We have cloud and rain across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland this morning from this weather front. But this area of high pressure has been dominating of late. It's edging its way eastwards, which is allowing even hotter air to arrive across parts of England and Wales. That's why temperatures will peak today in the low 30s. But that weather front further north is making for a damp start. The rain should ebb away, actually, from much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, turning brighter here, but we will see some of that rain pushing into parts of northern England, clouding over a little bit across Lancashire for sure. But further south and east, most of England and Wales, dry, hot and sunny. 33, 34 in the London area up towards East Anglia. It will be cooler elsewhere, certainly some coasts will be cooler, but many places well above average. Much cooler air though for Scotland and Northern Ireland behind this weather front, which will continue to dribble southwards overnight.